Hi, I am Dr. Tapas Das. I am an associate professor in the School of Business and Management, Christ University, Delhi NCR campus. Today, I am going to present my paper, and the title of the paper is Dynamics of Relationship between Exchange Rate and Macroeconomic Variables in India. So far as the introduction is concerned, given the importance of the rate of exchange and its variations in governing foreign trade, governments of most of the economies constantly monitor and regulate the economic factors that influence variation in exchange rate. Controlling exchange rate, even under government protection, becomes riskier in the presence of the speculators. One important question, that is, why should exchange rate movement be focused by macroeconomic fundamentals, has been argued that instead of forecasting exchange rate through fundamentals, agents can directly predict output, inflation, and uncovered interest rate parity. On the contrary, recent studies have shown that macroeconomic factors are not much useful in predicting exchange rate movement, especially with the advent of online trading system where high frequency data are available. Still, relevance of macroeconomic factors in explaining exchange rate movement assumed importance in the Indian context with the introduction of economic reforms. So, for writing these papers, the literature that I have reviewed are as follows. Zhao in 1996 concluded that rate of interest to be one of the important factors causing fluctuations in the rate of exchange. He also pointed that investors prefer to park their money in those countries where rate of interest is high but inflation rate is negligible. Therefore, high rate of interest can prevent investment as well as exchange rate to stabilize in any economy. Jin Kai in 2007 analyzed that macroeconomic variables are closely connected to each other in such a way that a slight change in one variable changes all other variables and exchange rate too, which can bring in disequilibrium in the economy and reduce interest rate also, which in turn may lead to decrease in investment. Julius et al. Showed that exchange rate between yuan and USD remained constant during 95 2005 and nominal rate of interest, inflation and government debt had incredible impact on exchange rate. Nikyu et al. And they have pointed out that the rise in inflation rate reduces the value of home currency, which increases the rate of exchange. Abbas et al. In their research on African countries found that effect of rate of inflation on the exchange rate is insignificant. Contradictorily, uh, Nexiulescu et al. Found that exchange rate and inflation rate are inversely related. Khan et al. Ascertained that with an increase in inflation rate, countries' nominal interest rate also increases, which in turn affects exchange rate. In the same line, Ebiringa, in their study on Nigeria, found that there exists a positive co-integration between inflation and rate of exchange both in the short run as well as in the long run. Argaido found that the fluctuations in the exchange rate are brought about by inflation. There, though there are a multitude of studies or literatures on the relationship between exchange rate and macroeconomic variables, but there are few studies that have worked on the co-movement or co-integration between macroeconomic variables and exchange rate in India, which is presumably a gap in the existing literature. So the theoretical background for this particular paper is that exchange rate carries a significant bearing or the relationship with the following macroeconomic variables. So the first variable, let's say GDP, when GDP of a country improves, foreign investors finds it's more profitable to invest in the country, so exchange rate increases. So thus, Theoretically, we expect a positive relationship between GDP and exchange rate. So when the home country inflation rate is very high, then exportables will become costlier and importables cheaper. So this will cause home currency to lose its value in the international market and vice versa. So therefore, there exists an inverse relationship between inflation rate and exchange rate. Increased interest rate will cause investment to fall and thereby reducing GDP of the country. This will cause exchange rate to depreciate. Theoretically, there exists an inverse relationship between interest rate and exchange rate. An increase in the supply of money supply in the home country will cause the rate of interest to fall in the money market. The fall in the rate of interest will cause investment to increase and GDP to rise, thereby exchange rate appreciates. Positive relationship between money supply and exchange rate. On the other hand, the increase in money supply will cause price level to increase, leading to inflationary pressure and causing exchange rate to depreciate. So negative relationship between money supply and exchange rate. So the net impact on exchange rate due to change in money supply depends on the relative strength of this positive impact and the negative impact. Trade balance deficit occurs when imports exceeds exports. Outflow of foreign currency is greater than the inflow of foreign currency. The demand for foreign currency rises. This causes domestic currency to depreciate. Theoretically, there is an inverse relationship between trade balance, deficit, and exchange rate. As terms of trade improves, the price of exports become greater than the price of imports. That is, export earnings exceeds import expenditure. This causes exchange rate to appreciate. Hence, a positive theoretical relationship is ensured. Positive relationship between terms of trade and exchange rate. With more inflow of FDI, supply of foreign exchange increases and capital investment increases. The increase in capital investment will cause the GDP to improve, thus exchange rate appreciates. There is a positive relationship between FDI and exchange rate. So the objective of this paper is to study the co-movement or long-term equilibrium relationship between select macroeconomic variables and exchange rate, and to see which variables have short-run causality to exchange rate as well. So hypothesis, the null hypothesis is there is no significant long-term equilibrium relationship between select macroeconomic variables and exchange rate, and the alternative hypothesis or the researcher's hypothesis is there is a significant long-term equilibrium relationship between select macroeconomic variables and exchange rate. So the data, I have taken 40 years of data. I mean, starting from this 81, 82 till 19 to 2019, 20. It's a time series data of 40 years on exchange rate, GDP, inflation rate, interest rate, money supply, trade balance, and the terms of trade. So the description of the variables are as below, and I have given the description of all these variables in terms of mean, median, and then standard deviation, skewness, and then kurtosis. So before going in for any analysis, I mean, so far the time series data is concerned, we first test stationarity with the help of this unit root testing or augmented Dickey-Fuller test. We see that all the variables or all the series, they are label non-stationary. That means they are non-stationary. Non-stationary. The raw data is non-stationary, but they are stationary after first difference. That means they are different stationary, and they are integrated of order 1. They are integrated of order 1. Now, since here we see that let's say inflation on the money supply and between this inflation and money supply, they're depending on the p-value, the coefficients of the regression. So we drop the variable, the money supply, and we take inflation. We retain the inflation only. Now we run Johansen-Jusselius co-integration. We run here Johansen-Jusselius co-integration test on raw data, because the co-integration test is to be applied on the raw data or the label data. So, and with the help of these two taste statistics. One which is a trace statistics and the other is known as this maximum eigenvalue statistics. We can see that at least one co-integrating equation exists between these variables, right? So the long run co-integrating equation. So the long run co-integrating equation, which is obtained through this Johansson-Jusselius maximum likelihood estimation method, is as following. We get to see that the GDP, FDI, INF, that is inflation, interest rate, trade balance, and terms of trade. And out of all these variables, the GDP and the terms of trade, so the coefficients are negative. The rule is here of this Johansson-Jusselius that where the negatives are there, so the relationship is a positive, and where the positives are there, the relationships are negative. So now from this table we get to see that the relationship between GDP and exchange rate and the terms of trade and exchange rate, they are positive, and the relationship between exchange rate and foreign direct investment, inflation rate, interest rate, and trade balance, they are all are negative. Here we get to see that the coefficients of inflation rate, interest rate, and terms of trade, these three variables are the coefficients are they are statistically significant. Now, after confirming that the variables are co-integrated, we go in for this restricted one. That means VECM model, vector error correction model. Now, before we go in for this vector error correction model, we have to check the optimum lag length, and this is done through the information criteria. Akaike information criteria, Schwartz-Bayesian information criteria, and Hanin-Quinn information criteria. Now, we generally take recourse to Akaike information criteria as Akaike information criteria is less punitive. Now we get to see from here, that Akaike information criteria, as per Akaike information criteria, the optimum lag length is equal to 1. Optimum lag length is 1. As per Akaike information criteria, optimum lag length is equal to 1. So in VECM model, we will be considering the optimum lag length as 1. So now we have run the vector error correction model, and we get to see that this is the error correction term. This is the error correction term. And what is the error correction term? And what is the value of the error correction term? Minus 0.405229. And this is significant also. So now what is required is that the error correction term must be negative and significant. So if it is so, the error correction term is negative and significant. In that case, we can say that there is a long-term equilibrium relationship between exchange rate and all other macroeconomic variables. So this error correction term, this shows that if in the short run there is any deviation, so this error correction term shows that the speed of adjustment from macroeconomic variable towards exchange rate. So it is a negative and it is significant. So that means there is a long-term equilibrium relationship, and the error correction term implies that the exchange rate may deviate from its long-term equilibrium position, but about 40.5% short-term deviation would be adjusted annually towards its long-term equilibrium. Now, so far as the short-run causalities are concerned, we also get to see from here the short-run causalities are concerned: inflation rate, interest rate, and the terms of trade. So they are significant. Short-run causalities are concerned, they are significant. Inflation rate, there is a speed of adjustment that is 11.98%. Inflation rate, speed of 11.98%. Here you get to see. And then interest rate, speed of how much? 0.064%. 0.064%. And the terms of trade, there is a speed of adjustment is 0.13%. Right? So now after that, we are required to show the variance decomposition analysis. So what is this variance decomposition analysis? Now the exchange rate is influenced by all other macroeconomic variables. So how the period wise, that is quarter 2, quarter 4, quarter 6, quarter 8, quarter 10, how exchange rate is being influenced by itself as well as other macroeconomic variables. So variance decomposition of exchange rate shows that the variation in exchange rate is predominantly explained by its own shock, followed by interest rate, inflation rate, and the terms of trade. Right? So although in the initial period exchange rate is largely explained by itself, the explanatory power keeps on declining over time. You get to see over there that it is declining over time. It is declining over time from 94.72 to 87.48 to 78.27, something like that. It is declining, right? Now we also show that if there is any unit shock or one standard deviation, let's say shock applied onto the independent variables such as say GDP, inflation rate, FDI, trade balance. So then, what will be the corresponding variation in the exchange rate? And this is shown by the impulse response function. This is shown by impulse response function. So this is the graphs of the impulse response function, and so far as the stylized facts of the output of the vector error correction model is concerned, then we get to see that 52.9% of the variation in exchange rate is explained by macroeconomic variables. That is, and where from did you get to know that? From the value of the R square. R square is 0.5290. That is 52.9% of the variation in the exchange rate is being explained by the macroeconomic variables. The model does not suffer from residual serial correlation or auto correlation problem as seen from the insignificant chi-square value of the R square. The model does not have any residual arch effect, heteroscedasticity effect, as it is seen from the insignificant chi-square value observe R square, and the model does not suffer from residual non-normality as seen from the insignificant Jarki-Vera test statistics. Jarki-Vera test statistics. Okay, so therefore, what we can conclude? We can conclude that we find a significant long-term equilibrium relationship between macroeconomic variables and exchange rate. In the short run, there may be a deviation from the long-term equilibrium, but about 40.5% of the short-run deviations will be adjusted annually towards long-term equilibrium. Now, so far as the short-run causalities from macroeconomic variables to exchange rates are concerned, we see that only inflation, where the speed of adjustment is 11.98%, interest rate, where the speed of adjustment is 0.64%, and the terms of trade, where the speed of adjustment is 0.13%, have significant short-run speed of adjustment towards long-term equilibrium level of exchange rate. So thus we see that the long-run equilibrium relationship model or the vector error correction model is a robust model as it stands old diagnostics text. Now for writing this particular paper, so these are the literatures that brief literatures that we have taken records to or we have reviewed also. Thank you.